So this is the second in a series of 2 videos that I'm doing about the anxiety avoidance trap, or the cycle of anxiety and avoidance. And in the first video, I talked about what it is and warning signs for kind of noticing when it's coming up or when you might be stuck in that trap. So if you haven't watched that, you can look at that first. And then in this video, we'll be talking about how to break out of that cycle and how to cope with the anxiety and move forward and take some action. And that's really what I want to focus on in this video, is this idea of action, not avoidance, or action, not anxiety. Because a lot of times when we're in this trap of anxiety and avoidance, the thing that feels the scariest is the thing that we actually really need to do to move forward and to stop feeling so anxious. And not all the time, but sometimes the thing that we're avoiding becomes much less scary once we actually do it, compared to how anxious or how scared we were just thinking about it. So I'm going to share 6 ways of coping with the anxiety, or kind of breaking out of this trap, and taking that action to move forward. The first tip that I have for you is around setting time limits. And so you can use this in one of 2 ways. If you notice yourself kind of spending too much time on social media, or just like scrolling, or too much time on Netflix or something, you could set yourself a time limit of, okay, I'll spend 5 more minutes, and literally set a timer for 5 more minutes or 20 minutes or whatever time that you choose. To do that, and then when the timer goes off, I'm gonna go start this task or think about this thing that I've been avoiding. The other way that you can use time limits is for the task itself. So if it feels too overwhelming to just, start, let's say it's a paper for a class or something, to think like, oh, that's gonna take me hours, or it's gonna take me all night, I don't even feel like I can start it. Okay, set a timer for 20 minutes or 30 minutes and say, I'm just gonna work on it for that 20 or 30 minutes. And then when the timer goes off, I'll give myself a break, and then I can come back to it. Because sometimes just taking that first step of just starting and sitting down and looking at it is the hardest. And once you get going, it becomes less scary and you get into a flow, and it feels much less daunting. So time limits can be something to try. Another thing kind of related to the idea that starting is the hardest part is breaking down whatever it is into the smallest actionable items. So we'll take the example of writing a paper again. If it's a 20-page paper, that's too daunting to do all at once. So how can you break it down into smaller tasks, and then break those down into smaller tasks, and then continue? And you want to get to the point where you get to a task that feels like, oh, I could definitely do that. I could do that right now. That feels very easy. So breaking it down into those very manageable, doable tasks. And if you can break something down to the point that it takes less than 5 minutes to do, and then just go and do that thing, and then move to the next task, either right away or take a break first. The third tip for breaking out of this trap is noticing if there are any issues of perfectionism. This can be something really hard for people with anxiety, because you can get stuck in this, having to be perfect or good enough, or imposter syndrome, etc., etc. So if you notice that, it could be something to work on long term, either with a therapist or through self-exploration. But in this situation, for this task that you're avoiding, is there an element of perfectionism? And can you work with that to tell yourself, whatever I do is good enough, there's no mistakes in a rough draft. If it's, talking to your friend or something, it's okay if I don't word this exactly right, like they'll understand. So just kind of noticing if there's this expectation that you're going to do it perfect, or you have to do it just right, and trying to kind of ease that pressure a bit. Related to the idea of perfectionism, another option is to kind of zoom out from the task that you're avoiding and from this moment and ask yourself, is this going to matter in 5 years? So if you're avoiding something that feels like it's just a huge, high pressure situation, and it feels like too much to really look at, kind of asking yourself, is this, how am I going to feel about this 5 years from now? Is this going to be as important then as it feels now? And sometimes that can reduce the pressure that you feel on yourself in the moment. The next tip is to plan a reward for yourself for after you complete a certain amount of work or a certain task. And that can help give you some motivation to get started. Again, make sure that the task that you're doing is broken down to something that's manageable, and then plan something for yourself afterwards as a reward, that you're, addressing this thing, you're making progress, and it can be whatever you like, but something that's maybe social or soothing or relaxing, but something to help motivate you to get started. The last suggestion I have for kind of breaking out of this anxiety avoidance trap is probably predictable, but I'm going to suggest doing a breathing exercise or a mindfulness exercise. These can be really powerful when dealing with anxiety, and if you're in this avoidance trap and feeling overwhelmed, just taking some time to slow down, do a breathing exercise like the square breathing or alternate nostril breathing, which I have in my videos, or do a grounding mindfulness exercise, can be really helpful to just slow down, kind of take care of yourself for a minute, and then maybe try one of the other suggestions that I've listed earlier in this video, and that might help it feel a bit more manageable. So I hope these tips are helpful, and when you try them, notice what your expectations are, and it's okay if all of them don't work for you. They won't all work for everyone. But if one or two work for you, then great, and you can carry those forward with you for if you find yourself in this trap again or feeling overwhelmed again. So thank you for joining me today, and take care.